of trade just with ASEAN, for instance. And we are steadily adding political and military content to those relationships, whether it's with Vietnam, whether it's with Japan, whether throughout the region, with Indonesia as well. But the real volatility is to our west. According to IISS, last year in 2013, 75,000 people died of armed conflict or terrorism in what they call the Greater Middle East, from Morocco to Pakistan. Think of that, 75,000 people. That's more than 78% of all conflict-related deaths in the world. Now that is instability of a very, very high order. The geopolitical balance in West Asia was destroyed by the Gulf Wars, creating space for extremism, for terrorism, and for dichotomies in which unpopular regimes met their nemesis at the hands of their most organized domestic opponents, whoever they were, whether it was the Muslim Brotherhood or more radical groups or the army in some cases. And this so-called spring was fueled by social media, by propaganda, by other black arts, all of which have been rapidly spread and learned. And the net result is extreme volatility in a region that is critical to our security, where we get about 63% of our oil from the Gulf. About almost 7 million Indians live and work there in the Gulf. And we got remittances last year almost of the order of $75 billion from that region. Now, all the fault lines, whether it's Shia Sunni, whether it's autocracy, populism, whether it's extremism, moderation, they all cross in the Gulf. And I just told you how critical they are to our security. Now, we've tried to stay out of these dichotomies. And we've tried to insulate ourselves and our people, because when you have almost 7 million people there, we need to try and work to insulate them from these effects. And we've worked with all the major actors, all the regional actors, all the major actors to try and defend our security interests against terrorism, to prevent its spread to us. In fact, I think we are one of the few powers who are able to do so, because in the space of 2 weeks earlier this year, we had visits from Iran, from Saudi Arabia, from Bahrain, from Egypt, from Turkey, you name it. It's all at the same time, within 2 weeks. Now, this kind of balancing is not easy, it's not pretty, but it's necessary. And I think it really serves our interests. And the last and the biggest change that I think we faced in our security environment is a result of technology, particularly ICT. If you look at communications and IT technology and what it's done to our lives, the mobile, which is now the smartphone, it's become an instrument of social mobilization and protest. You saw it in the Arab Spring, for instance. We saw it in India. We saw it in the Aam Aadmi Party. But more important, we also saw how rumors and threats carried on the social media could spook tens of thousands of our own citizens into leaving Karnataka, leaving Maharashtra, going back to the northeast year before last. And that was sheer rumor and the use of social media to create social disturbance. Terrorist groups now use the internet, use ICT for communications, for recruitment, for financing, and with less success so far, but they've been trying to use it as a weapon to create kinetic effects in society. But luckily, these are domains where we started work relatively early. We have the talented manpower available in IT. And frankly, this is also a domain which seems to suit our disaggregated way of functioning. So we have achieved some successes in this. So friends, when all in all, where do we stand, we as India? I would say that although we face an increasingly challenging security environment, we as India also have better capabilities than we've ever had before to deal with them. But we live with this paradox. We are simultaneously increasingly secure, and at the same time, at least if you listen to what is said in public, we are increasingly paranoid about our security. And since we live in such a rapidly changing world, we need to find new ways of ensuring our security. How can I say this? Consider how secure India is today compared to the 3 decades after independence. There is no existential threat to India's integrity today. The risk of war is not what it was. For 2.5 decades, we have faced cross-border terrorism, subversion, external support to insurgent groups, attempts to divide us communally, even the printing of fake notes. And yet, those are the 2.5 decades when India has done best in terms of accumulating power and raising our own people out of poverty. Because the means available to the Indian state to deal with our security have also grown considerably in the last 2 decades. And if you look at broader security issues like food security or energy security, India, again, is today a better place than she was then. Think of where we were when we lived from ship to mouth on PL 480 grain, or when we had wheatless days. We've come a long way, and I think we need to recognize that. We are in a changed situation, we need to change what we're doing, but we have come a long way in terms of our security. But then if we are actually so much more secure or differently secure, why are we increasingly paranoid about our security? Why do we hear so much of this? One reason is, I think, because there is a general realization that what worked in the past may not work anymore, and that it's necessary to find new ways of dealing with it. It's also because, as I tried to describe, some of the new threats are more complex, more serious, and they are threats as much to our stability, to our way of life, to our quest to modernize, and to our strategic autonomy, rather than just to our existence. Or we have much more to lose as a country. And as I said before, there are real threats. I mean, I've just listed some of those. But why is there the hysterical tone when people talk of security now? It's not just because threat inflation is an industry. It always has been. A military-industrial complex needs an enemy. Journalists need a story. Diplomats need a crisis. There is an industry and an economy built on threat inflation. As TV anchors who sit counting up nuclear weapons and missiles reminded us last spring when the Chinese pitched some tents in Depsang. But that doesn't explain the tone. To my mind, there's two relatively recent things which explain the tone. One is we have an expanded definition of security today. We rightly demand much more by way of security, especially in terms of our personal security and freedoms in a society which, as I said, is in such rapid change. As a society, we expect much more from the state, and we hold it to much higher standards, while at the same time, we also make it harder for the state to do some of these things. We impose checks and balances on it, and we hold it to much higher standards of behavior. We now, therefore, we define national security in the broadest possible way. We include energy, food security. Some people even say it's a national security issue to handle climate change. Secondly, because we have higher expectations and an expanded definition, because we have this expanded definition, we have much higher aspirations and expectations. And as the security calculus has expanded, so have the demands on the security apparatus. And public belief or faith in the capacity of those organs, which, especially in terms of internal security, is something that needs to be worked on. We might have made progress, as I said, in improving our counterterrorism mechanisms, particularly since 2008. But today, where every single demand is amplified by the social media, by 24/7 news channels, the blogosphere, and so on, and then when you add partisan politics to the mix, then you can see why there's a general perception of insecurity. So you actually have this dichotomy between the reality of how secure we are and the perception of it in our society. One or the other will have to change. I mean, if the perceptions change, I think that will be relatively painless, and I think maybe a few egos might be bruised, but not much more. But if we try and change the reality, that could be a much more painful process, I think. So where are we today? We are today in a new normal, I think, where expectations, publicity, increasingly try and drive governments in their security choices, not just an objective calculus of what is the balance of power and how do we achieve our national goals in this situation. For instance, we now conduct counterinsurgency and counterterrorism in the full glare of the TV cameras. Similarly, in cyberspace, because of the nature of the medium, and not just because of Snowden's and so on, I think we operate assuming that because it's an open, transparent medium, that what the state does or what anybody does will one day become public knowledge, and most likely sooner rather than later. And that's the new normal. I think we have to learn how to do this. Now, this new normal has its advantages. Civil society is today involved in security issues in a way in which it never was before. You look at Nagaland today, there's a spontaneous civil society movement opposing extortion and tax demands by insurgent groups. And unarmed civilians have stood up against these armed groups, refusing to pay them money and trying to tell them they shouldn't, with very little support from outside, from anybody else. I mean, they've stood up against armed intimidation, and that is really quite a phenomenon when you see that happening in your society. We as a state, have to learn how to operate in this environment. And this is not just about media management, it's about learning new ways of working and changing so that we can use its characteristics to achieve our own security. I am confident that we will do so. After all, we have shown an ability to learn as we go. And if you measure by outcomes, India hasn't done badly. We've done reasonably well in one of the toughest security environments that any country has had to face. And yet, we've almost tripled GDP in the last decade, despite the environment that we faced around us. This has been one of the most transformative periods in Indian history, and it's never easy living through this kind of rapid change. Most contemporaries are blinded or alarmed by the pace of change, and people keep telling you about the good old days and how they miss the stability and the predictability. But the fact is, we are fortunate to be living in a period of such rapid change. And to my mind, the great Indian experiment is alive, well, and increasingly secure. Thank you.
And today, we have the Kerala International Center associating with us. Ambassador T.P. Srinivasan is already here. He's, of course, a very well-known person in Trivandrum, so I don't need to particularly introduce him. So I request Ambassador Srinivasan to now take over and maybe give his own remarks and then facilitate the interaction.
I must also mention that many stalwarts of the Kerala International Center are here. Some of them have already been mentioned, but many of them are trustees of the Kerala International Center, whether it is Ambassador K.P.S. Menon, Mr. V. Ramachandran, Justice Hariharan Nair, Colonel Gobinathan Nair, so many of us from the Kerala International Center. And I'm also glad to see that the civil service aspirants are here. Not only aspirants, but also civil servants, like the Chief Secretary. But I did say this to several of the civil service aspirants I met in the last few days, that this is an opportunity for you to come and listen to the National Security Advisor even before you join the service. And I'm an evangelist for the Foreign Service, so I always tell them that come and listen to Shankar, then you'll know what a Foreign Service officer should be and ought to be. Well, Shankar, I do not want to raise any questions. I thought my role is to basically guide the discussion in a manner in which we can best make the best use of our time. I don't know how long you have. Maybe till about 5:30 perhaps. Okay. All right. All right. But the overwhelming feeling that I got listening to Shankar was a kind of sense of relief and comfort. I think that is what all of you felt. And his last words will remain ringing in our ears for a long time to come. The great Indian experiment is well and going well too, right? Something of that sort. And that's very, very, very reassuring. Particularly in the context of what he admitted, that the public mood of some kind of hysteria, some kind of fear, some kind of paranoia, as he mentioned. So in the context of that, this kind of assurance coming from someone like the National Security Advisor is extremely important. Although some of us may have some doubts as to whether this is really so, because of the same paranoia and fear that we ourselves have. First, a word about internal security. Shankar, you mentioned in Kerala's lead in social policing. In fact, we have gone one step ahead just in the last few days. The government is proposing to set up a university, police studies and forensic sciences university. And we had the first meeting yesterday with, of course, DGP was there, with Professor Menon as the chair, trying to develop a university, not just a police academy, which would focus not simply on the police, but also on internal security in a big way. And this is, I think, there are other police universities in India already, but the way we have conceived it is going to cover many of the aspects that you mentioned. So Kerala probably can claim another first in this field, and we hope to accomplish this fairly soon. So we don't know whether it will be just a police university or an internal security university. And many of the issues that you mentioned in internal security matters will of course receive very detailed and concentrated attention at this university, and so that I think is going to be important. And as for our neighborhood, which is often we refer to as the tough neighborhood, the news is